Hello, everyone. If you've just joined, we're just waiting for everyone else to enter from the waiting room. So we'll be just a moment here. All right. Still some folks in the waiting room, so just letting everyone enter here. All right, looks like we have just about everyone. Seems like it takes a while for 999 people to exit the waiting room in Zoom. So 200 plus to go. All right, almost have everyone. Almost there. All right. I think we have everyone. Okay, hello world. Can everyone hear us okay? Well, so nice to see so many faces from around the world. My apologies for the slow start with so many people here today and so much technology. We were doing quite a bit of setup and testing, so we got a bit of a late start, but so glad to see literally 999 people from around the world joining us, and invariably some others from YouTube. So welcome to those of you from Harvard, from Yale, and everywhere else in the world and beyond. So in just a moment, we will begin here. We're just setting up one final piece. And in just a moment, we shall begin. All right, hello world. So welcome to How to Prepare Your Resume and Yourself for Technical Interviews. For the past several years, CS50 has been holding a workshop like this, both on campus as well as online, for students who are going off into the real world, whether it's for summer internships or full-time jobs or the like. Beyond taking classes like CS50 and typically higher level courses in computer science as well, there's a good amount of preparation that you can do if interested in working in the tech world or really in the real world more generally. And what we thought we'd do is bring back one of our favorite alumni, one of CS50's former head teaching fellows, Tommy McMillan.
Wow.
Wow, I got that far. So sorry, Tommy. One of our favorite former staff members, former head teaching fellow of CS50, CS50's own Tommy McWilliam. Tommy is literally the person I turn to when I don't know the answer to some technical concept. He is the one I turn to myself when I want advice. And this is because he's such an amazing technologist and also an amazing teacher. And he's had the opportunity over the past several years to work at companies like Quora, and then most recently his own company, Serenade, which focuses on applications of artificial intelligence to accessibility of computers. So we are so happy, Tommy McWilliam, to have you back here with us, and allow me to turn the floor now over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the intro, and hello, everybody. Really excited to be here and talk through how to prepare your resume and yourself for technical interviews.
And let me add to that, if you would like to ask any questions during the session, what we've done today just to help us manage so many participants is we've disabled the chat window, except that you can chat with us, the host. But what we would prefer that everyone do, that you go instead to cs50.ly/ask. And what Brian and Tommy and I will do is keep an eye on the form that you have submitted, and we'll do our best then to either call on you or perhaps more simply verbalize your question for you so that Tommy can address it roughly around the time that you ask. So again, go to cs50.ly/ask. And I've pasted that URL into the chat as well. Tommy, back to you.
All right. So here's what we're going to cover today. So first, talk a bit about choosing companies and thinking about where you might want to interview. Next, talk about resumes and some do's and don'ts there. And then lastly, just walking through the whole interview process, what you can do before the interview to prepare, how to handle yourself during the interview, and then what you can do after the interview as well. So let's start with choosing companies. There are lots of different tech companies out there, and even companies, using technology in some way. And so there's lots and lots of choices often as you start to enter the job market. And so I put together a list of 4 questions that you might want to ask yourself to sort of filter down that really large list into a list of companies that you would really be excited about interviewing. Since you probably don't want to be doing hundreds or thousands of interviews, it's good to sort of filter this down, at least at the beginning, to a smaller set of companies to start with. So the first question to ask yourself is, what are you looking for out of this role? Whether it be an internship or a full-time role, everybody is looking for something different. It could be you're early on in your career and you're really looking for growth opportunities and strong mentorship. Or it could be that you're later down in your career and you're really looking to take your career to the next level and then lead a team and look for opportunities for personal growth. And similarly, there's lots of factors that are important to different people. Some people really care about location. Some people really want to be remote, especially now. For some people, they're at a place in their life where they can take a higher risk role with with a compensation that's more equity heavy. And other people are not. They're sort of in a place where the liquid compensation is more important to them. And with all of these questions, it's really important to know that there's no right answer here. No one is better or worse for looking to join a small company versus a large one, or having a remote company versus a non-remote company. Everyone is really different. And so as you're reading articles online or on Twitter, you might see some really biased perspectives, but really take some time to ask yourself, what is it that you want? And recognize that what you want and what you need might be different than what other people want or need. The second question to ask yourself is, would you really be excited to work with this team every day? And I think about this in 2 parts. There's what the team is working on. So there's the product and the company and their mission. But then there's also the people that you're working with. Keep in mind, you're going to be spending a lot of time working with these people and on this specific project or mission. So make sure that's something that you're really excited about, or else you're going to find yourself in a few months into your new role, not really wanting to be there anymore, and then having to start this process all over again. Next, think about whether or not what you value aligns with what the company values. So most tech companies will publish somewhere on their website something like their values statement or their mission or their vision. And take some time to read through that and see if it fits with what you're looking for. Some companies in their values, they'll talk a lot about close collaboration and mentorship, and that's really important to them as a culture. And so they've built a culture that centers around mentorship and people helping each other. And so if that's something that's important to you, that company might make sense. Or maybe you go to a company's values page and they talk a lot about being really small and scrappy and not having a lot of process and putting impact above everything else. And if that's something that appeals to you, something that's less stable and something where you can just go and do stuff, maybe that company is right for you. So companies want to publish these. It helps them differentiate themselves from the many, many companies out there. So before you interview somewhere, just take some time to try to find those values and just get a sense of what the company's culture is like in advance. And lastly, think about whether or not this company's size is right for you. Uh, the size of a company is going to make a really, really big impact on what their culture and process looks like. So here's a helpful diagram. This originally came from Dustin Mostovitz, the CEO of Asana, in one of his talks. But I think this is so good that I like to talk about it as well. So you can basically filter down these companies into three groups. There's the really small startups, usually less than 50 people. There's the mid-sized startup, and I think now it's probably even more in the range of 500 to maybe 1,000 would still be considered a mid-sized startup. And then you have these large corporations that, the 1,000, 5,000 plus. And so you can see here that a lot of things are going to vary. So one clear one here is this mentorship row. So at a really small startup, you're probably not going to have a ton of time for mentorship. Everyone is really focused on getting this product off the ground and getting this business off the ground, that engineers can't spend a ton of time sort of mentoring each other. And maybe that's what you're looking for. Maybe you're the type of person who likes to learn on their own or has enough experience that they don't feel like mentorship is that important. So that could fit for you. At a mid-sized company, there's going to be a little bit of mentorship here. Maybe you'll have a mentor assigned when you first join the company who you can go to with questions. Maybe there's some documentation in the forms of presentations or a few sort of intro sessions when you join the company that might be called a boot camp. So there's some light mentorship. And at really large companies, you're going to see a ton of this. So there are some companies where they'll even have an iOS university where you can go and learn iOS just at Google or just at Facebook and sort of how they do it. And there's sort of a ton of built out structure there. So again, there's some exceptions here. Maybe there are small companies that do focus a lot on mentorship, but generally speaking, the size of the company can give you a pretty decent picture of what the day-to-day is going to look like. Okay, so that's it for choosing companies. So let's talk a bit about resumes. And the most important thing that I want you to take away from this part of the talk is that resumes are not that important. I think a lot of people spend a ton of time stressing over getting the absolutely perfect resume, but that's not often the best use of time, especially as you're trying to prepare so much to succeed in these interviews. So when I was doing recruiting and have talked to a bunch of recruiters, the average time that a recruiter or a hiring manager is going to spend looking at your resume is no more than 30 seconds. We get a lot of resumes coming in every day, and so a recruiter isn't going to be agonizing over your resume for 20 or 30 minutes. They're going to skim it for 30 seconds and make a decision about what your next steps are going to be. So to that end, I've put together these 10 simple resume rules that as long as you follow all 10 of these, you're going to end up with a resume that is good enough. Okay, so number one page, no exceptions. There is no reason you should ever submit a resume that is more than one page. Maybe there's exceptions here if you're in academia and you're submitting a CV, which is hopefully more than one page. But if you're just applying to a typical tech company, do not spend more than one page on your resume. There are prolific engineers like the inventor of Python. Their resume is one page. Yours doesn't have to be longer than theirs is. Number two, which is related, is make it easy to skim. Keep in mind that a hiring manager or recruiter is not spending very much time reading your resume. If they have to dig around in a small font or try to find some piece of information they're looking for, like when you graduated or what internships you've had, make their life absolutely as easy as possible so they can spend that 30 seconds and get a really good picture of what you're actually bringing to the table. Number three is make your contact information obvious. I've seen a lot of resumes where I thought this looks like a great candidate, but then there was no way to contact them. They didn't have an email address or a LinkedIn or anything, or maybe it was so buried down the page that I was sort of frustrated after reading their resume. I'm sure I still contacted them anyway, but again, you want to make this as easy as possible on the person who's reading your resume. So make it easy to contact you, since that's the whole purpose of having a resume. Number four is you want to highlight specific accomplishments. So as much as you can, when you've gone through an internship or put out a personal project, be specific about what you did. Maybe at your internship, you improved the speed of some area of the product by 10%. If you can put that in your resume, definitely do that. Or if you worked on a personal project, talk about what technologies you used, or if it's out there in the world, how many people are using it and what impact it's having. And the more specific you can be, the better. Keep in mind, of course, that in some internships and roles, companies have non-disclosure agreements that will prevent you from saying, how much you increased revenue, for instance. So don't break those, obviously, but as much as you can, try to highlight specific things that you did at internships, as opposed to, I wrote code there for a few months. Number 5 is, if you have interesting personal projects, definitely include them. For instance, if you have a GitHub link where you've published some cool side project or a library or something you've built, include it on your resume. That's something I like to do as a hiring manager, just to get a sense of what this person likes to work on, what their code style is like. And it sort of shows what their interests are. Maybe you made a personal project that aligns with some hobby you have, and it sort of helps me get a sense of what you're like as a person. But again, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time reviewing all of your code in GitHub or something like that. I'm just going to skim it to sort of get a flavor of what we're getting into at this part of the process. So if you have interesting stuff, include it. If you don't, not a deal breaker, but if you have it and it's good, definitely showcase it. Next up, please do not include charts or ratings on your resume. I've seen a lot of resumes where somebody will say they're, a 5-star team player and a 4-star communicator, and I immediately ask myself, what does a 4-star communicator even mean? Or similarly, somebody will say they're an expert at jQuery, but they're only a proficient in Python. And it doesn't mean anything to me. Like, who is the expert in Python? The inventor of Python, or someone who's been doing it for a year? It's super unclear what that bar is. So this basically adds nothing of value. Instead, talk about the specific things you've done. If you have built some cool web application with Python, tell me about that. Don't tell me about your self-assessment with Python, because it's not that interesting to me. Similarly, don't include an objective statement. And this might vary a bit around different industries and even different cultures, but for typical tech companies, this is just a waste of space. We know what your objective is. Your objective is to get a job as a developer. You don't need to tell me that. That's sort of why we're going through this whole process. So if you have an objective at the top of your resume that says, my objective is to secure a job in a fast-moving company where I can learn a lot, I know there's really no point in putting that in your resume when there's all this other stuff that needs to fit on this one page. Next, this is the easiest one. Use a professional looking email address. If you don't have one, there are lots of ways to create new email addresses. So I would definitely recommend looking into something like Gmail. I've seen resumes that have come in. I'll never forget this one email. There was some person's name, I forget, and it was their name, 1234567890987654321 And there's no reason for that to be the email that's on your resume. You're trying to get into the door as much as possible. If there's anything silly, just try to avoid that. Next up, include relevant links. Like I said, if you have a LinkedIn, if you have a GitHub, if you're a designer and you have a portfolio, definitely include that on your resume. The recruiter or hiring manager might not click it, and so don't build a resume that depends on them clicking on this, because they might not. But if they're sort of on the fence, or if they're just curious, they probably will go and check out these links. So include anything that you have. And lastly, don't sweat the aesthetics. There's a lot, don't spend a lot of time trying to get precise formatting and colors and layouts, or trolling through millions of paid templates for resumes. The content is what's really important. A nice looking resume might catch my eye, but I'm really focused on just this content and skimming what have you done in the past few years, and really what type of role do I think that you'd fit into well at this company. So that's it. Those are 10 really simple rules. As long as you can follow these, you're going to be in good shape.
Tommy, can
So
I interject
yes,
with a question from Mohammed from the US?
for sure.
Mohammed asks, what are some good programming projects that aren't too complex or too simple that would make his resume stand out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one thing that you could lean on is any final projects that you've done in classes, especially if that final project was something that you got to build yourself. Don't put CS50's pset1 on your resume, since everyone has done that. But your final project is a good opportunity to build something that you care about. So that's a pretty good one. But in general, I would just sort of think about a project that's interesting to you. I almost don't want to give some cookie cutter idea because it becomes some cookie cutter thing. But if you're interested in hiking, you could make an app about hiking spots in your area. Or if you have a dog, you could sort of talk about some like advice for new dog parents. Or I'm a big baseball fan, so I could build a scoreboard or some stats application. So just think about a project that would be pretty interesting to you and build that. Cool. So now I have a couple of resumes. These are both fake because I just went to Google Images and searched example resume. And so I wanted to, given these 10 rules now, I wanted to get people's thoughts on what works about these resumes and what doesn't.
Sure. If you'd like to raise your virtual hand in Zoom, happy to call on someone here. If you'd like to raise your virtual hand. And if unfamiliar, in Zoom, that's under the participants window. There should be a hand raise icon there. And Brian, do you mind helping out with the calling on virtual hands?
Sure. I see Nick, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, on the first look, it's pretty small font. I really have to squint to look at it. There are graphs. It could be a lot more concise and a lot, there's some objective words and graphs that I don't really know what that means. And so that's what I think first on the first look.
Yeah, I think those are really good observations. You can see here that the top left, there's this very long objective statement that ends with this person is looking for a data science position, which I already knew. And in the bottom right, there's all these skills where they have high accuracy but lower analytical skills, and nothing is less than what appears to be a 4 out of 5. So it doesn't add a ton of value. That space could absolutely be reclaimed to make this a lot easier to skim. Let's do one more thought before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's go to Elizabeth. I see your hand raised.
Hi. Yeah, I thought it was a little bit clunky because the education has clubs and honors and graduated with distinction and the skills and then volunteering and certificates. So there's a little bit of redundancy and overlap in all of those aspects that I think could be blocked out and maybe a little bit unnecessary.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. It also sort of contributes to making it harder to skim because I'm at the top of the page looking at education and I go down to the bottom of the page or actually back into education again. So it's sort of not optimizing for that make it easy to skim rule. So some positives about this resume, if you actually read the content under work experience, which is unfortunately a very small part of this resume, but it's actually pretty good. They're very specific about what they're doing. They assisted research, they collected data sets, they participated in these meetings with execs, the same with the next one. So it is pretty specific about what they're doing. They didn't just say, I analyzed some data. So that's one. And here is another one. So let's do reactions to this.
I see Pradnya, you have your hand raised.
Hi everyone. So I think there's a lot of content and there's no white space at all. So it looks very scary at first glance.
I think that is exactly the same reaction I had, is that it looks very scary at first glance. It's super, super dense. This is not easy to skim. Something that's actually in really small font is where they worked, which is probably the first thing I care about. So yes, very, very difficult to skim. Let's have one other reaction.
All right, let's see. Let's go to Adarsh. Adarsh, I don't think we can hear you. Just check your microphone.
Hello, can you?
I think we can hear you now. I think
Yep.
You're good now.
Yeah, it's too clumsy. I don't think you can read this in 30 seconds and skim it out. So it's too much of info. You need clarity in the information which is not there here.
Right,
It's too much
exactly.
of clumsiness.
Yeah, like if I look at this core expertise section, this to me is a little bit strange since it's sort of listing things that are redundant with this professional experience section. And then this thing at the top right with this like intersecting circles, I've stared at this for a while and I still don't know what that means. And so it's, again, I think it's trying to do these like bar charts or something fancy, which do not recommend. Just be really straightforward with the resume. On the positive side, the content here is also actually pretty good. Like if you look at the second one, it says developed a VMware EX5 driver for next generation operating system, super specific. The bullet above it actually has a nice metric of expedited triage of software regression, correcting issues in 24 hours. That's a nice metric. And similarly above, there's experienced team with 60% attrition. So I really like the metrics and the content here. But again, similar to the last one, should be really, really easy to skim, which it's not. And then lastly, contact information here, super easy to find. It's right at the top. You can call this person at 0000000. So that's good that they have that as well as a portfolio link. So that's it for resumes. Like I said, you're only going to be capturing about 30 seconds of attention from your hiring manager or recruiter. So if you have the choice between spending another 3 days changing the font on your resume or another 3 days practicing for the interview itself, definitely pick the second one. So let's talk about the interview itself now. So we're going to break this down into those 3 parts: what you can do before the interview happens, what you can do during the interview itself, and what you can do afterwards. So let's start by talking about what to expect out of a technical interview. If you've done some of these before, this might be obvious, but if you're sort of new to the game, this is sort of what you can expect coming in. So first, timing. If you can, interview as early as possible. If you're an undergrad, and particularly in the US, a lot of people are interviewing for internships for next summer during the previous summer. So maybe in, now in August or September 2020, people are already interviewing for internships and full-time roles for summer 2021. If you don't have time to interview now, maybe you have some stuff going on, or there's lots of sort of classes happening right now and you don't have time, that's okay. Companies aren't going to shut down the interviewing loop or the interviewing funnel until maybe the end of the year. But if you can, try to interview as early as possible, just so that you don't end up in a situation where some company has already filled up its internship class for the next year. As much as companies don't like to sort of stop interviewing, there is a reality where if you have some 50-person startup and they have already got 20 interns, they probably can't take any more. And so if you wait too long, you might miss the boat. So interview as early as possible, but it's not the end of the world if you're not interviewing right this second. Next is to plan interviewing into your schedule. Interviewing takes a lot of time and often a lot of emotional toll, especially if things aren't going super well. So just plan that into your schedule. Maybe drop one extracurricular during interviewing season, or unofficially take maybe an easier class, or wait to take that super hard class until a spring semester. But just make sure you have enough time for interviewing and almost treat it like it's another class or another extracurricular in your schedule. And lastly, make sure you're looking for opportunities geared at your experience. And again, this is going to affect timing as well. So a lot of these larger companies will have programs designed especially for people who are newer to engineering. So if Google and Facebook, for instance, have apprenticeship programs, are often called something like Facebook University, or the Google Engineering Practicum, and they're designed for people who don't have a lot of CS experience. And so try to look out for those programs, which often have totally separate interview processes and sometimes separate timing. But it's really important to try to go for an opportunity that's geared at your experience. If you're a first-year university student, you don't want to be trying to get a role that's designed for rising seniors, because the expectations for the interview process are just going to be really different. So hopefully, if you end up applying to a role that doesn't fit your experience, some recruiter will move you the right way, but they might not. So just make sure that you're looking for opportunities designed for your level of experience. Okay, so the entire process from end to end, it's going to have a few different parts, and every company is going to have a different process. So there's no one, uniform process that's going to follow. But generally speaking, here's what the picture looks like. So companies might start with a coding challenge. This is typically something that's not designed to take more than 30 or 45 minutes, but just taking some time on your own, or maybe in a site that lets you sort of view a question and submit your code online, just very simply, here's write a function that takes this as input and it takes this other thing as output. And you're not actually speaking to anyone. You're just sort of doing this on your own. And maybe the site has a timer or something like that. But that's often the first step. Some companies don't do this. Some companies do multiple of these, but that's a reasonable first step. The next step you can expect is a technical phone screen. So this is a conversation, probably with some engineer who works at the company you're interviewing for, and going through some technical questions. And so this is an area where we're going to focus most of the talk on, so I won't dive too much into here. The next is going to be an on-site interview. So same sort of types of questions that you'd see in the technical phone screen, but instead of happening over the phone, they're either happening over Zoom nowadays, or hopefully soon they'll be happening more in person, give you a chance to sort of meet people face to face. And then last, some companies will do a take home. And this take home might come earlier, it might come later, but this is sort of a longer coding challenge that gives you the opportunity to build something larger and showcase your skills that way. What companies do here and where this is in the process is really varied. Some don't do it at all, but it's becoming more popular, especially now when people don't get to meet in person. It's just to get more signal from folks by giving them a larger take-home assignment. So we're going to focus most of today on the technical phone screen and the on-site. So next, what are the expectations of you as the interviewer? So in some sense, this is what the interviewer is looking for out of you when you're doing the interview. So first up, we're looking for your ability to think through a problem. We're going to be giving you a problem that you haven't seen before and look at how you respond to that and how you can reason through the different parts of that problem. Next, we're looking for you to write functional code. Unless your interviewer tells you, they are not looking for you to write pseudocode. They're not looking for you to write a paragraph describing how to solve the problem. They're looking for you to write functional code that's clean and correct. Next, we're looking for you to fix issues. In your functional code, if there are bugs or problems with that, we want you to fix them. If we tell you there's a bug, we want you to find it. But more importantly, we want you to try to find proactively issues with your code yourself. Next, we want you to reason about the runtime of your code. What's less important is getting the exact O of whatever correct. What's more important is recognizing, okay, this seems like it's going to be exponential. I bet there's a way that I can make this faster. And lastly, and probably most importantly, we're looking for your ability to communicate clearly. Even if you write code perfectly, that does not mean that you've done well in the interview. What's really important is your ability to communicate ideas and communicate with the interviewer so they get a picture of what it would be like to work with you on a day-to-day where they probably have to collaborate and communicate with you. So these are the 5 things to look out for. These are, if I'm an interviewer, this is what I'm looking for out of the interview. And so this is what you should make sure that you're doing. So broadly speaking, you'll run into maybe 5 different types of interviews on either the phone screen or the on-site. And I'll just quickly walk through what each of these looks like. So the first one is the algorithms interview. And this is probably the most common, and again, what we're going to spend the most time on today. But this is an interview where you're given a problem of the form, write a function that takes this as input and returns this as output. And what's interesting about these problems is that the code is often very simple, but figuring out what the solution is the hard part. So you might spend in a 45-minute interview, you might spend 20 to 30 minutes just sort of reasoning through what the solution is. And then to write up that solution, it might only be 5 to 10 lines of code that you can write up in 5 minutes. But getting to those 5 to 10 lines took a lot of time and thought. So if you find yourself sort of spending a lot of time trying to think of the solution, that might be by design. But in general, try to practice these algorithm questions where you look at the solution and you're like, that's it. But getting to that solution is really hard. And that's actually the crux of the interview. We're not looking at, can you write those 5 lines of code? Next is the coding interview. And this is basically the opposite. This is a problem where the solution is fairly straightforward, and conceptually, you could probably understand it in just a few minutes. But then the process of coding it up is much more difficult. Maybe you actually need to write 50 to 100 lines of code to solve this. There might be a number of different corner cases you have to keep in mind, or interesting sort of off by 1 errors you might run into. And so this is sort of another type of interview question that you can practice. And again, you're doing these practice problems, you can sort of tell, like, this seems like it's pretty simple, but then you go to write it out and you're like, okay, there's some interesting corner cases here. The next type of interview you might run into is what's called practical interview. And so these can take a couple different forms. The first form might be an interviewer, even telling you, hey, bring your laptop to this interview and have it set up with your development environment of choice. I'm going to ask you to build something from scratch. Maybe it's a command line utility or a simple web application. But in the practical interview, you're using whatever language, technology, libraries, Stack Overflow, whatever you want. And this interview is basically assessing what are you like to work with in this sort of more natural environment that's not on a whiteboard or just writing some contrived algorithms. It's building something real. And then the other form this interview might take is the interviewer will give you some existing code base, often some large code base, and they'll ask you to fix a bug or make some changes to that code base. And what this is measuring is your ability to jump into some new area you've never seen before and start reasoning about the code and how it works. So these are a little less common for people fresh out of school, but they do still exist. And so just be prepared for that. Also less common for people fresh out of school are systems design interviews. And again, these can take two forms, and both are a little less about coding. The first form this might take is a technical design question. So an interviewer might have a 45-minute conversation with you about how would you architect the Gmail app? Or if you were building Gmail from scratch, what would you do? What database would you pick? What schema would you design? What's the communication layer between the client and the server? What are some things you'd have to keep in mind when it comes to, maybe a bad internet connection or latency or accessibility, things like that. So this is sort of an architecture question where you'll sort of talk about what components you would build and how they fit together. Then the second form the systems design question might take, even if you're just applying for an engineering role, is a product design question. Maybe it's if you were designing Gmail, what would you do? Or what's the feature that's most missing from the Gmail app? You'll probably run into these tailored to the question, to the company you're applying to. So if you're applying to Airbnb, or an interviewer might say, what's missing from the Airbnb app. And so keep that in mind as you're going into these. Just think about this in advance. Use the company's product and just think about what do you like about this product and what do you wish were different, and just have that ready to go. You might not be asked it, but if you are, you don't have to sort of like think about it on the spot. And then lastly, you'll almost definitely run into this one, regardless of what level of experience you are, is this culture interview. And so this interview is just trying to get at who you are as a person. So the culture interview, again, will have sort of two parts to it. One part is looking back and one part is looking forward. So looking back, you'll be asked to talk about some previous experience you had, maybe your time at a prior internship, maybe some research you've done if you've done academic research. So just be prepared to talk about some previous experience you have. Think about what challenges you faced, think about what feedback you got, think about what you're most proud of, think about what you might have done differently. Just sort of take some time and introspect and have all of this stuff ready to go. Rather than trying to think about it on the spot and then realizing in retrospect, you said something silly. Just think about this in advance and be ready to talk about some past experience. And then for looking forward, think about what you want next. When we were talking earlier about what questions to ask yourself as you're applying to different companies, you've already asked yourself this question. What are you looking to get out of this role? So your interviewer is also going to want to learn about that. They're going to want to know, what are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? So again, just be prepared to talk about what you're looking for and talk about, are you looking for mentorship or growth or collaboration or learning? Everyone's different, but just have this ready to go.
Tommy, can I interject with a question about system design?
Yes.
So Swapnil from India asked how to prepare for system design as a fresher. And similarly, Rashmi from Canada asked how they would practice system design questions. Do you have any recommended resources?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So something I like to do is actually just look at my phone, look at a few apps that are on there and think about, how would I build this? So maybe it's Twitter is a decent example. And you think about, okay, how would I build Twitter? Okay, well, I'm going to need a database for tweets. I'm going to need some iPhone app. Okay, now how are those going to communicate? Okay, maybe I'll create a JSON API. Okay, well, what should that JSON API look like? Like, what should each of those entries go through? And just sort of go through that exercise. It doesn't have to be a mobile app. It could be any app, but I think your phone is sort of a good inspiration for things you use every day. And for practicing, we'll get to this in a bit. I'd really recommend just practicing with friends. Pick a buddy who can be a mock interviewer, and you can sort of go through that conversation yourself. Especially if there's someone a bit more experienced than you, that can help, but that doesn't have to be. Someone at equal levels of experience could say, okay, you told me you want to have a JSON API. What's going to be in that API? And then sort of pretend to be the interviewer. So I would worry the least about this of the 5, especially if you're just coming out of undergrad. But just sort of going through those exercises a few times can make it so that you're not totally taken off guard if you do run into this. But oftentimes when you're interviewing, not all interviews are equal. So if, for instance, we do ask a new grad a systems design question and they don't do that well, the hiring manager might be like, it's fine. Like, we didn't think they were going to do that well anyway. We just wanted to give them a shot to see how they would do. So keep that in mind too, that if you're an undergrad or fresh out of school, the algorithm stuff is the most important. If you've got 5+ years of experience, then systems design coding is probably more important, especially culture is more important there too.
Thanks.
All right, so let's dive into actually preparing for these interviews now that you have a sense of what's coming down the pipeline. So you want to start with the basics. So something throughout this talk is going to be that the more you practice, the less stressed you're going to be, which sounds obvious, but it really makes a big difference in interviewing. When you're interviewing, it's a really stressful experience. There's someone you've never met before judging your performance on coding, and you're put on the spot to solve some problem that you've never seen before, and there's a time limit. It's this inherently stressful experience. But the more you practice, the more you're going to be less stressed, because you're not going to be worrying about some of this basic stuff. So first, pick a language to interview in. Pick this well in advance and stick to this. When you're given a problem, you shouldn't be asking yourself, should I use Python or Ruby? You should know that in advance. I'm just going to use Python for everything. That's my language. Nearly every interviewer is going to let you pick the language that you want. They're not interested if you're a Ruby or a Python master unless they tell you in advance. So pick this language and then learn it. Make sure you know its syntax, you know its built-ins, and you know common error messages. So that way, when you are in the interview and you're thinking, how do I reverse a string? Is it string.reverse? Is it reversed of string? Just don't have to worry about that. If you practice the basics in advance, you will not have to worry about this, and you'll have everything down cold. Same thing with error messages. If you're writing some Java and you know what the common compiler error messages are and you know how to fix them, you won't have to stress about that in the middle of an interview.
And Tommy, a couple of folks have asked about which languages they should ideally have going into an interview.
Yeah, that's a good question too. The simple answer is the language you are most comfortable with. But if you're sort of deciding, I'm not comfortable with any language, or I sort of want to pick a good one, I think Python is a decent choice. The characteristics I would look for are languages that have a decent standard library. So you don't have to, C doesn't have, a bunch of stuff built into it, like trees or reversing a string or hash tables. So pick a language with a lot of stuff that's built in, like Python or Ruby. And also pick a language that isn't super verbose. Languages like Java are known for, you have to define a class, define a method, and they're sort of more verbose. And if the more verbose it is, the more you have to practice and memorize in advance. So starting from scratch, I would pick a scripting language, maybe Python, maybe JavaScript that's got some stuff built in. But otherwise, if you've been doing Java for all of your undergrad for 4 years and you love Java, you're really comfortable with it, don't try to go learn Python a week before an interview. Stick with Java because that's what you know. And so next, what should you know how to do? So here are some super simple basics. You should know how to create a function, define a class, and then work with common data structures like strings or lists or trees. Again, you shouldn't be thinking in an interview, oh crap, how do I define a return type in this language? You should just know that. Practice in advance so that it just doesn't become a stress point for you while you're in the interview. Another thing that sort of falls in this basic camp is doing runtime analysis. So like I said before, as the interviewer, we're not looking for you to come up with some crazy, complicated complexity analysis. I don't care if you're telling me, the runtime is, of the square root of the log of 1 over n. You're just not going to see that. You basically just want to say, does my code fall into one of these 5 major categories? Is it constant, logarithmic, linear, polynomial, or exponential? And more often than not, we're just looking to recognize when something is exponential and say, okay, this is exponential, how can I bring this down to linear or constant? So again, that just sort of practice these and being able to identify if a solution falls into one of these 5 buckets. Don't try to go crazy with the proving runtime or deep down that math rabbit hole, because interviewers are just they're not interested in that, and they're not going to give you a problem that even requires that much math. Okay, so once you've got the basics down, you know your language down cold, you know its standard library, you know how to create a hash table and reverse a string, you know how to do that. Next is you want to start building up your toolbox. So many interview problems reduce down to just a few core concepts. And so what you can do is practice these core concepts and practice problems in these domains. And then when you get an interview question, in a real interview, you can sort of think about which of these tools in my toolbox can I use to solve this problem. So just a few tools. Recursion is super common. Definitely be comfortable writing recursive functions going into an interview and using that for divide and conquer type algorithms. Graph searches are super common, something like breadth first search or depth first search, and just given a tree or a graph, how do I traverse that? Greedy algorithms, super important, which you've seen in CS50. String manipulation problems are really common. Something, is this string a palindrome, or how do I reverse this string, or just sort of like simple string stuff. Just it's an area that you can just practice in. Knowing searching and sorting algorithms off the top of your head is helpful. Being able to write binary search is really useful. Probably, being able to write insertion sort from scratch is probably not so useful, but being aware of, how to sort a list and what the runtime of sorting that list is useful. And then lastly, dynamic programming, which is a concept that you'll probably run into in an algorithms class if you haven't taken one yet. And these are probably more geared at sort of more experienced folks, rising juniors, rising seniors anyway. But basically, this is just a programming technique you can use to take something that was exponential runtime and make it faster. A lot of problems are sort of designed for this. So that's an area that I'd practice as well if you're not familiar with it. So those are the concepts. And now think about the tools you have at your disposal. So as you're solving some problem, think about, okay, can I use an array here? Maybe a linked list makes sense. Maybe a hash table. Can I make this go faster with a binary search? Maybe there's some cool shortest path algorithm I can use. Memoization or caching is sort of a simple way of implementing dynamic programming to make something go faster. But again, just learn these tools. And when you're given a problem, you can think about, I know this set of tools in my head. Which of these tools can I apply to solve this problem? So next, as you're practicing, make sure you accurately simulate the environment. So I've noticed a tendency, what people tend to do is they'll look at a problem and they'll think about it for a few minutes and they're like, oh yeah, I can see how that works. And then they just look at the answer. That does not count as practice. And if anything, it makes it worse because you often don't actually totally see the answer. And once you see the answer key, there's actually a bunch of stuff that you didn't realize you would have missed. So don't do that. Accurately simulate what an interview is going to look like. So that means try using a pen and paper. Don't use a computer at all. Some interviewers will literally do your coding interview in a Google Doc because they do not want to give you the ability to run your code so that they can see how you work without a compiler or without being able to run your code. So simulate that yourself. Also time yourself. If you know an interview is going to take 45 to 60 minutes, don't give yourself 3 hours to solve the problem because that doesn't accurately simulate what you're going to have to do. So make sure you're aware of how long your time, how much time you're taking on these practice problems. And again, don't cheat. Don't look at Stack Overflow. Don't Google things if you're not allowed to Google things in interviews because it doesn't accurately simulate the environment. Then as you're doing all these practice problems, look for patterns in your performance. So, let's say that you do, 3 recursion problems, 3 string problems, and 3 graph problems. And let's say you get all the string ones, you do okay on the graph ones, but you didn't get any of the recursion ones. That means that you need to go focus on recursion. And again, everybody's different. So I won't say everyone, focus on this 80%, focus on this 20%. What you should do is self-assess, learn what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then go in and practice the stuff that you are not good at, which is different with everybody. And then lastly, practice with friends. A lot of interviewers are going to be somebody giving the problem and interviewing, and then simulating that can be useful since, maybe, your friend has a problem that they already know the answer to, and they can possibly give you a hint or help you, which is, again, more accurate of a representation of an interview than just being alone. So if you can, definitely recommend getting some buddies to practice with. Okay, so that's everything before the interview. So now let's talk about the interview itself. So something I'm going to repeat a bunch is that during the interview, it is not the output that matters, it's the process. That means that you could write perfectly correct code very quickly and still not pass the interview. What we're looking for as interviewers is the process that got you there. how you're able to reason through the problem, how you're able to communicate, how you're able to respond to changing environments. So I've done plenty of interviews where the interviewer did not get the correct answer, but they still moved on in the process because I got a good picture of what it's like to collaborate, and they did a really great job collaborating, vocalizing their thought process, even if they did not get the correct code. So keep this in mind throughout. So interviews are going to start with some sort of icebreaker. No interviewer is going to say, "Hi, my name's Tommy," given a sort of list of interviewers. Like, that's just not how interviews start. They're going to introduce themselves, and they're going to want you to introduce yourself. So before you start, take a deep breath before you answer the phone or before you click the Zoom button so that you feel good to go. And before, have an intro prepared. You know, they're going to ask you, what's your name? Where'd you go to school? What are you looking for? You know, what's something cool you've done lately? And just have this prepared, particularly if you're really nervous about this. You know, don't stress out about having to come up with some interesting story on the spot. Just have it ready to go. Just eliminate that source of stress entirely. So be ready to talk about something you've worked on, or be ready to talk about a class you're taking. And again, don't ramble here. We're not looking for like a 20-minute monologue about who you are. We're just looking for a quick 1 to 3 minutes. Here's who you are. Here's where you're from. Here's something you've worked on lately. So just have this ready to go before the interview starts. So next, the interviewer will give you some technical problem. And again, don't panic. This is, you know, it's really important. Try not to just like get super nervous or break down. Just don't panic. Think about all the preparation you've done and how that's going to reduce all the stress. So don't worry as soon as you get the interview problem. You're going to get through it together. Something that's really, really important is once the interviewer has given you a problem, you really need to tell them if you've already seen that problem before. So for instance, if last week you did this exact practice problem, don't try to pretend like you've never seen that way before and you know you think you're going to win the Academy Award of interviewing. It does not work. Interviewers absolutely know if you have seen a problem before and you're pretending. I do not believe I've ever been fooled by this. So it's a really easy way to get instantly rejected is to lie. So don't lie. Just tell the interviewer if you've seen it before. Sometimes they'll even say, "Oh, that's okay. Let's just do it anyway." But you've told them in advance so that they later don't realize that they were lying. Back at Quora, there are a number of cases where someone was on an on-site loop and they had 2 or 3 different interviewers, and the interviewers forgot to tell each other what questions they've asked. So interviewer 1 asked the same question as interviewer 2, and we'd know if someone's lying at that point because as we had candidates who didn't say, "Oh, I just did that question." So tell your interviewer if you've seen it. Next, after you have the question, ask clarifying questions. Make sure that you understand the problem. One of the worst things you can do is go off on a 20-minute rant or write code for 20 minutes that doesn't solve the problem, which sounds sort of wacky, but I've seen it plenty of times because some of these problems can be sort of nuanced. So something I like to do is verify some output for some input. So if your interviewer says, write a function that does X, you say, okay, so if I got the inputs A, B, C, I should output Y. And the interviewer say, "Yep, that's right." And so it sort of confirms that you understand what you're trying to do here and that you don't go off on some crazy angle. So next, it's going to be on you to start solving the problem. So here, always think out loud. And you're going to feel sort of weird, like vocalizing your thought process, or you might feel like this is strange. I just want to like go off in a corner for 15 minutes and think. Unfortunately, you can't do that in a technical interview. Reason being, if you're off in a corner for 15 minutes, the interviewer is not getting any signal. They don't know what your thought process is like. They don't know what it's like to work for you. So even though that might be your ideal way of solving the problem, don't do that in a technical interview. Just practice and learn how to think out loud. And so while doing so, it might be helpful to talk through different approaches. You can start by saying, okay, well, we could use a linear search. Maybe we could use a binary search. Would that work? And just sort of walk through that. And if it's helpful, you might want to draw a diagram, especially if you think a tree is the right way to model a problem. Just sort of draw out a tree, either in ASCII art in the editor, or just if you're on a video call, have a pen and paper ready, and you can just show the interviewer on the video camera what that looks like. But particularly if you are sort of a visual type person, don't be afraid to draw that diagram to help you visualize what's actually happening. So now, as you're thinking through the problem, try to pattern match against what you know. So this is why it's so important to build that toolbox in advance and go through all those practice problems in advance, because you can start to pattern match some problem against something you've already seen. So for instance, in your toolbox, there's things like graphs and searches and recursion and memoization. So just think about it. Can this problem actually be formulated as a graph? Maybe it's not open with, hey, here's a graph. How do you do a search? But maybe you can think to yourself, okay, well, I'm trying to find something. Maybe if I represent or model this problem as a graph, I can actually just traverse that graph to find the solution. Or similarly, maybe this is a problem where I can actually break this down into different subproblems and then sort of cache the answers to those and build up those smaller subproblems into that larger solution. So again, this pattern matching is really important. And that's one reason why it's so important to do a bunch of these problems in advance. It's so that you can pattern match against them. So when you're approaching a problem, always think general before specific. So something you should not do when solving a problem is try to list out a million corner cases in advance. Even though you might see, okay, well, if the input is 0, I know the answer is going to be this. And if the input is 1, the answer is going to be this. Don't do that. You're just going to sort of waste your time, and you can often get down the wrong track. But think generally. Think, okay, what is common about all these solutions? And let's say you're writing something recursively. Think about what the base case and the recursive case are. Don't think about a million corner cases where the answer happens to be obvious. And on a related note, if you're writing out your solution or you're even just describing your solution, if it seems too complicated, it probably is. These aren't these crazy hard problems that it takes a mathematician 6 days to solve. They're designed to be solved in 30 to 45 minutes, which means they're not designed to be super complicated. So if you find yourself in this super complicated solution, take a step back and think to yourself, how can I simplify this? Right? I think I'm making this too complicated. And then as you're thinking about a solution, you might get really stuck, and that's okay. If you sort of hit a wall and you just don't know, just ask your interviewer for help. Saying something as simple as, I'm not sure where to go next, or I'm not sure I really see a solution here. It can be the difference between you struggling for 10 minutes and you sort of getting a hint and then getting the answer. Obviously, if the interviewer is giving you lots of hints and you're not able to solve things independently, that's not good, especially if an interviewer is looking for you to solve the problem independently. But at the same time, if you're just like totally stuck, you hit a wall, it's much better to ask for help than to just sit staring at a wall for 30 minutes. And lastly, before you write a single line of code, make sure you have explained your solution and your interviewer agrees with you that it's going to work. All right, if you explain a solution and you're convinced it's going to work and your interviewer doesn't sort of agree with you or indicate that you're on the right track, and then you go off and spend 45 minutes writing it and then it doesn't work, that's end of interview. You've sort of burned it. So make sure you both agree that what the code you're about to write is, what that code is going to do. Agree on that up front before you start typing a bunch of stuff. And again, process, not output. As you're thinking about the solution to the problem, it's not about whether or not you get it instantly. It's about whether or not you're able to vocalize your thought process and reasonably think through all the constraints of this problem.
And Tommy, a number of folks asked, and perhaps the most pointed formulation of this question was from Mohammed from Egypt, how to handle the stress during the interview if you're not sure how to approach the problem in code.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And like I said, the most important thing to realize is interviews are inherently stressful. The interviewer knows that. They know that if you are sort of on your own or on the job already, that you're not going to, you're going to perform differently and probably better because you're not under that stress. But for me, at least, and a lot of people that I've interviewed, the best way to alleviate stress is just to practice. Know exactly what you're getting into. Practice a really wide variety of problems and have a good sense of what these things you can pattern match against are. Otherwise, sometimes it can help to just take a deep breath, take a step back. It's totally okay if you tell your interviewer, do you mind if I just think for a few seconds and take a deep breath and collect yourself? You don't have to be constantly talking every second of the interview. Just don't go off for more than a few minutes without saying anything. So yeah, I think unfortunately the reality is it's stressful and everybody knows it's stressful, but the more that you practice and the more that you know what's going to happen, that sort of fear of the unknown goes away because you sort of know what you're getting yourself into.
Thanks.
Okay, so now we're into actually writing code. So again here, constantly communicate. Something I'll even do is I'll just almost verbalize the code I'm writing. So let's say I'm creating a function. I'll say, okay, well, I'm going to create a function. Let's call it find minimum. It's going to take one parameter. And as I'm talking, I'm typing and I'm sort of describing the code that I'm writing. And again, this feels really weird, And you wouldn't ever do this as an engineer. You wouldn't be typing and talking at the same time. That's really weird. But it helps the interviewer understand what you're thinking. And maybe they can see, okay, the thing you just said and the code that you just typed, they don't match. And so they can help you understand that and find that bug. And also you might find yourself catching these bugs. Then another really important thing is get something working. So a lot of folks, when they're interviewing, they come up with a solution and they perhaps correctly recognize it's not the optimal solution. It's maybe, you know, a little bit slower or takes too much memory. And then they won't even write that up and they'll try to jump to the harder solution. Don't do that. It's always better to leave an interview having written something than having written nothing. Right? If you spend the entire 45 minutes trying to get some crazy optimized runtime and then leave the interview not having written any code, that probably didn't go well because the interviewer didn't get the signal that they're looking for. So if you come up with a naive solution, just ask your interviewer, should I code this up? And they'll probably say yes, because they want to see your ability to code something else, to code something up. And then once you have the simple version working, then go off and simplify or optimize or make whatever changes you need to make. But that way, at least you've written something down, and then in the process of writing a simpler solution, you've had more time to think about this optimized version. So it can help actually get you to the right solution. And then lastly, listen to your interviewer. As someone who's interviewed a lot of people, I want everyone I interview to succeed. It is not fun for me as the interviewer to watch someone struggle and flail, and I want to help them. And oftentimes, because I want to help you, I'll offer you hints. You know, maybe you're sort of on the right track, but going down, you know, taking a wrong turn. I'll say, well, actually, what if we do this instead? Or say something like, well, have you thought about what would happen if the input looked like this? If I say something, it's me trying to help. I'm never gonna offer some like, you know, throw you on the wrong path intentionally or expect you to like prove me wrong. I'm trying to help. And the interviewer has probably seen this problem dozens, maybe hundreds of times. So they know all of the different things that are gonna work and not work. So if your interviewer tells you that something you're doing is probably not gonna work, listen to them. Don't argue and try to convince them that it's not, because the chances that you are right are really low. Maybe you are, and that's great, but the chances you're right are really low. So listen to your interviewer, and you know, if they give feedback or pointers, take them. Don't argue with them. Again, sounds obvious. You'd be surprised at how many people have told me I don't know what a binary tree is. So then when you're writing code, the code itself, always create a function that returns the answer. I've seen some people just sort of like start writing like, you know, an if statement into a blank editor and then sort of like hard code the input and variables. Don't do that. We're expecting you to create a function that returns the answer, not print the answer, not whatever, returns the answer. So just assume that unless you're told otherwise, that that's what you're expected to do. Then as you're writing code, code quality matters. Try to follow, you know, good code quality practices that, you know, like the ones you learned in CS50. We're decomposing large blocks of code into smaller functions as needed, using readable variable names, factoring out common logic. You know, we're not looking for you to write this extremely super clean code, but we're also not looking for single variable names or anything like that. And again, process, not output. We care about how you write the code more than we care about the precise code that you wrote. Okay, so last up, you've written your solution. Now you want to make sure that it works. Something to not do is write the code as soon as you type your last semicolon, say done, and expect the interviewer to like test your code for you. You want to verify that your solution works. And the best way to do that is to pretend that you are the computer. So take the input that you agreed on at the beginning of the interview, said this is the input, let's take this as the output, and just run your function. Sort of step through every line by line, and sort of say, okay, my function starts here. Well, first, this is going to happen, and then we're going to enter this branch, and then we're going to call ourselves recursively again, and just walk through, and then you can verify what your code is actually doing. Just pretend that you're a computer or a debugger and step through line by line, and do that out loud. Verbally reason about what's happening in your code, what state is changing, what memory is being used, etc. And as you're doing this, look out for bugs. If an interviewer tells you that there's a bug and they fix it and you fix it, that's great. But if you identify there's a bug and then you fix it, that's even better, because it shows that you're proactively looking for issues with your code and you're verifying that it's actually correct. So take the time to actually look for bugs and don't expect an interviewer to sort of point out any issues for you. I've seen a lot of people who are like, okay, does it work? And my answer is always, I don't know, you tell me. Because I mean, I know if it works, but I want you to see you verbally reason through your code and see if it actually does. There's a category of interviews where you can actually run your code. I think this is actually becoming more and more common, which I think is a good thing, so it's a bit more realistic. But if you cannot run your code, definitely reason through verbally. Even if you can run your code on a computer, i.e. the interviewer allows you to, still run through verbally to sort of show you can reason through about your code and confirm that it works. But then if you can run the code, actually write out some test cases. You don't have to use some like unit testing framework or anything. You could even just like, use print statements or use simple assert statements, but write them out and make sure that your code actually works. If you run your code and it doesn't work, now you're in debugging mode. Something to not do is like flip into guess and check mode, where you're like, okay, well, there's an if statement here. Let me try +1. That didn't work. Let me try -1 without even thinking about it. Try to reason about what your bugs are and identifying them. And so, don't run your code every like 3 seconds. Like run your code when you're confident you've made a change that is going to change the result to the correct answer. And lastly, if you can, you want to use prints or debug statements and try to print out all the relevant state. I've seen a lot of cases where people are just like printing out just the answer and they're like, huh, that didn't work. And then they sort of guess and check and print out just the answer and they're like, oh, nope, still didn't work. Print out all of the relevant state. Maybe you're maintaining some lists, maybe there's some counter variable. Just print out a bunch of stuff to get a sense for what your code is doing as you run it. So the same advice I'd have for just programming generally, but especially when you're interviewing, when you're under a time crunch, printing out as much as possible about what the state is and what's happening under the hood can help you identify issues faster. And time matters here. So again, it's about the process, not the output. If you run into a bug, great, because now we get to see what it's like for you to debug. If you don't run into bugs, okay, fine, good job. You probably will. And so it's not about whether or not you wrote bug-free code or fixed all the bug instantly. It's about you ran into a bug, what did you do? What was your thought process? Did you panic, or were you able to print out the relevant state and reason about what's going to happen in order to fix it? Okay, so really quickly, I just want to run through an example problem so you can see sort of all of this advice and what it might look like to go through an interview. So here's an interview question. I think this is actually pretty representative of what a typical phone screen question might be. So just to run through this, what we're going to do is we're going to take something called a rotated array. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s, to rotate that array means I'm going to shift every number to the right. And as soon as that the last number goes out of bounds of the array, it's going to wrap around. So if I were to shift this array 3 times, I would get this number. You can see the 1 is basically shifted 3 places to the right, and then every number has wrapped around. So the problem statement is, given just this right array, find the number of times that it was rotated. So that's a problem. We're in a phone screen. Interviewer just said that. Now what? So first, let's approach the problem. Number 1, we are not panicking. We've done a lot of practice. We know what we're expecting. We're not panicked. So we're going to confirm that we understand the problem. So in this case, it was nice because it gave us that input and output. So what I would do is I would just give another one. So I'd say, okay, so if I had 2, 4, 6 and rotated it twice, I would get this, right? And the viewer says, yep, that's right. I say, okay, great. Now I'm confident I understand the problem. Next, if I have any clarifying questions, I'm going to ask them. So for instance, I might say, and this list will only have sorted integers. And you're going to say, yep, it will. So, okay, great. I'm confirmed the list is sorted. I've confirmed there's just integers. I don't have to worry about anything crazy there. So again, it might be obvious, you might think you know, but don't make any assumptions without explicitly stating them, or you're going to end up on the wrong track. Okay, so what I would do next is I would look at the example the interviewer gave. So this was their example. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rotated 3 times is this. So okay, so what are we looking for here? So I'd realize that, okay, what we're looking for is we're looking to find this number where both the left and the right are larger, right? Because I've rotated 3 times and the number at index 3, well, okay, that actually looks like the left and the right are larger. Maybe that's what I want. So in this case, we can see that because this list was sorted, this is actually going to be the minimum. And so I'd say, okay, that's kind of a cool observation. Is that true? So let me look at my other example again and say, okay, yeah, actually this is generally true. So, okay, first thing that jumps to mind in my toolbox is, well, we can just linear search and find the minimum, or find this case where the number to the left and the right are both larger. And I would say that, and then the interviewer might say something like, sure, let's code that up, and then I'll go and code it up. Or they might say, sure, that'll work, but linear search is so obvious that let's not waste time writing that up. Let's see if you can find a faster solution. So this is almost one of the most dreaded phrases you can hear in an interview is when your interviewer says, sure, but can you do better? And when that happens, we are still not panicking. So what do? We turn back to our toolbox. So what do we got? We've got recursion, divide and conquer. Kind of. Maybe there's some way to formulate this recursively. I don't know if I see it immediately. Let's keep going. Can we formulate this as a graph? Probably not. It's just sort of a single array of numbers. I don't really see the graph search. Could we do something greedily? Not really. We're sort of like searching for something. I don't know about that. Strings, no, we're all integers, doesn't help. How about binary search? Okay, now this is something, right? Binary search works when you have some sorted list of integers. And this is like sort of sorted, right? Like everything is in order except for this rotation. So maybe we could do something with binary search here. And so what to realize is that this problem is just binary search, but with a different sort of a win condition or search condition. Rather than looking for some particular number, we're looking for this number where both the left and the right are larger. So we can say, okay, let's start with binary search and let's just modify it a bit. Rather than just returning when you hit some number, we're going to return when this new condition is met, which is when we find this minimum of the array or both the left and the right are larger. And I got stuck with the Zoom, but that's okay. Okay, so here we go. So I formulated the solution. I've described this to my interviewer. This is binary search, but we're changing the search condition. We're instead going to look for the number where both the left and the right are larger. That represents the minimum of the array, and the index of that number is the answer. The interviewer says, yep, that's it. Let's write some code. So the first thing I do is I just write binary search. I've practiced this. I have this down cold. I don't have to worry about how do I write binary search. Just practice this. You don't have to worry about it. So all this is binary search. You'll notice that I gave everything sort of a nice variable name. There's no single letter variables. I've started with a function. I have a function that's going to take the list as input. It's going to eventually return the output. And then I've just written this out. This is just binary search. The only thing I haven't done is written the base case, or basically written the case where I find the result that I'm looking for. So let's do that. So the result I'm looking for is, this is basically, it's sort of in between these two numbers. So let's look to the right and let's look to the left. Say, okay, that's gonna work, but remember that we're wrapping things around. So I'm going to run out into an index out of bounds error potentially, right? If mid is 0, I'm going to end up negative, or if mid is the end of the list, I'm going to go past it. And because we're doing rotations, let's fix that bug next. So this is nice. This is just a nice trick that doing practice problems, you know off the top of your head, here's how to wrap around a number either to the right or to the left. I shouldn't have to like derive this in the middle of the interview because I've just done practice problems. This is decently common in practice problems. You'll definitely run into this. And so there we go. I fixed that bug. I didn't have to have the interviewer tell me there was a bug, but because I sort of thought about what state I could have and what mid could be, I recognized this bug myself. And then lastly, I'm going to run through this code and realize, okay, there's one condition I didn't take into account here, and that's if the list is already sorted. It's basically never rotated at all. So I can just create a quick case that takes that into account. And so now I've written all this code. And so what am I going to do next? I'm going to run my code on the example input. So I'm going to be the computer and run through my code line by line. So I'm going to say, okay, given my binary search, we're going to land in the middle, which is on the 5. 5 is greater than 4 and greater than 1, does not meet our condition. So what do we do next? We compare the 5 to the 3 and the 5 to the 2. And 3 is less than 5, so that means the minimum can't be over there because everything in between 3 and 5 must be in between them because the list is sorted. But 5 is greater than 2, so the minimum must be there because there must be a smaller number in between those two things. So we can move our binary search into the right half of this list. Okay, then the middle of that list is going to be 1. Let's look to the left. 5 is greater. Let's look to the right. 2 is greater. That's it. We met our condition. So we're going to return the index of 1, which is 3, and this list has in fact been rotated 3 times. So that's it. The code there wasn't super long. It was 10 to 15 lines. I think this problem falls into this algorithm category where I think realizing it was binary search was sort of the hard part. but then writing up binary search wasn't too hard because I've just got that down cold. Okay, now let's think about runtime. Can keep thinking out loud here. Don't never stop thinking out loud. So we're saying, okay, let's think about the runtime here. Well, binary search, I just know is O of log n. So this must be 2. I didn't really make any modifications here, and that's it. Nothing terribly complicated. And then we'll just do one last check for bugs, and then we're done. So that's it. That's sort of what the thought process looks like, and everything that your interviewer is going to be looking for. From thinking about the solution, thinking out loud, applying your toolbox, writing out the code, looking for bugs, and running the code verbally. That's sort of what we'd be looking for out of that interview. So last, just wrapping up after the interview. So after the technical question, your interviewer will almost certainly ask you, so do you have any questions for me? There aren't very many bad answers to this question, except for no. That is a universally bad answer. So just have some questions ready in advance. And importantly, have some questions ready that you can't just Google. So, don't ask like, how big is your team? Or don't ask like, what does your team work on broadly? Just stuff that's like obvious. Don't ask. Ask about something you'd only get from the opportunity to talk to this person. Like, what does your typical day look like? What is your team culture? What's something you wish you could change? What's a project that you are proud of recently? And what does your path at this company look like? These are all things that you cannot Google, and they're sort of personal. You're hearing about this person's experience, which for you as the interviewer is really useful because you're learning about what this company might be. Hopefully at the end of the day, you'll get an offer for this company and you have to decide whether or not you want to take it. And these questions can really help you. A lot of companies too, once you receive an offer, they'll set up these reverse interviews with your potential coworkers. Because again, they're trying to sell you on this offer. And so they want to give you information about what it would be like to work at this company. So same thing here. Ask these questions that are much more personal and not something you can get just by Googling. And last, the most important thing you should do after an interview is don't worry. Interviews are extremely high variance. There are lots of really great engineers, including myself, who goes into an interview and just totally bombs. I'll never forget one of the earliest interviews I did. I broke nearly every rule that I've talked in this talk. Talked about here. It was this Facebook interview, and it was this problem about binary trees, and I hadn't practiced binary trees. And the problem set I was working on was in this language called OCaml, which I did not know very well, but I said, well, I just wrote some OCaml. I'm going to pick OCaml for this interview, even though I've never written OCaml before. And I got absolutely nowhere. The syntax didn't make sense. I did not even try to verbalize the solution first. I just wrote a bunch of code and it didn't work. And I absolutely bombed. And the reason I know I bombed was because after the interview, I was walking down the hallway and my interviewers were in an elevator and they were talking about how bad I did. As I walked into the elevator, and it was the most awkward elevator ride, definitely of my life, possibly also of their life. But it's okay. Everyone happens to everybody. Hopefully you take the elevator by yourself. But don't worry if this happens to you. Everyone bombs. Nobody likes interviewing. It's really stressful, but it is the only way for us as interviewers to understand what it would be like to work with and collaborate with you. So it is this very necessary evil. So view each interview, whether you did well or not well, view each interview as an opportunity to get better. Think about what you did well, what you didn't do well, and try to be honest with yourself. Be like, okay, I think that my intro there was super solid, but then when they gave me the problem, I just sort of froze and I stopped talking. Next time, I'm not going to do that. And don't worry, people can get rejected from companies, and we're not all going to talk to each other. Just getting rejected at Facebook doesn't mean you're rejected from every Silicon Valley company. Just view every interview as an opportunity to get better. And don't worry, recognize that great people do horrible on interviews. So that's everything. I just want to leave you with a few takeaways. One, have the basics down. Practice a language and syntax and built-ins in advance so you're not worrying about it during the interview. Next, build up your toolbox. Do lots of practice problems in a variety of different areas and just build up the set of tools like hash tables and linked lists and binary search and graph searches. Just have these ready to go so that you can apply them in the interview rather than trying to remember how to do breadth first search in an interview. Next, do lots of practice problems. Just once you think you've done all the practice problems you could possibly do, go do more. This is the best way to practice, is to see what these questions look like, how to solve them, and you're going to start to see patterns that you can recognize and pattern match against in your interview. Next, before you write any code, communicate a solution. Make sure that you've thought about and verbalized your thought process to your interviewer before you put pen to paper or hand to keyboard or whatever you're using. And lastly, verbally run your code after you've written it and look for issues. This is how you're going to find issues with your code, is by being the computer running through everything line by line. And remember, it is the process, not the output. And that's everything I've got. So I'd love to stick around and answer more questions for folks who have them.
Yeah, indeed, Tommy, thematic in the questions we got, and I hope folks will forgive. We got some 295 questions, and I know we've only been able to field some of them, but a few people asked about the issue of age. We, of course, have a lot of college students in attendance today, but also some older adults as well. Sugun from Nigeria asked, do you think recruiters tend to favor or prefer younger candidates? And Irene, similarly from Canada, asks, what tips can you give to people who are transitioning into the developer roles in their mid-40s?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in my experience, no, we're not favoring candidates of any particular age. I think what companies will look for more than age is experience level. So company might say, hey, we've got a team of 10 new grads. We really need to hire a mentor onto this team. So they might be looking for someone with more experience, or that might be the opposite. I remember I managed a team a few years ago where everyone on the team had like 10 years of experience. And so we had a bunch of leaders with nobody to lead. And that's not good either. So we actually wanted to infuse some new grads onto the team. So if they're looking for anything, it's that. And so tips if you're just breaking in, it can sometimes be a bit of an advantage because you're sort of not biased with a bunch of doing these in the past and having your own sort of views of ways to succeed or not. But I don't know if there's anything super different. I think that regardless of your age or experience level, going through lots of these practice problems is really helpful. Just thinking about building that toolbox is really helpful. And I don't know if there's anything I would do differently based on age.
Right. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. So at this point, allow me to officially and formally thank Tommy for returning and joining us. It sounds like he'll indeed be able to stick around for questions, but if you need to drop off, please feel free to do so right now. We will follow up later today with an email with a link to the recording of today, as well as a link to Tommy's slides. Thank you all so much for joining us, but allow us now to open the floor for questions on camera. Brian, would you like to call on the first few folks?
Sure. Let's go to Mohima. I see you have your hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was asking about, you said earlier the starts with the basics. I wanted to know, what if I choose to learn two languages together?
Yes, that's a good question. So how to handle doing multiple languages. So for interviews,
because because I like Python, and my university, to follow the university syllabus, I had to learn C also.
Yeah. So if you know a few languages, I would advise you to choose just one of them for interviewing, because that way you don't have to think about, is C better or is Python better for this interview question. So I'd probably just pick, and I'd probably choose Python of the two you listed, because that's a better language for interviewing, just because the standard library is a bit easier. It's harder to mess up syntax. So I would probably pick just one and focus on that for interviewing.
Thanks. Brian, someone else?
Sure. Let's go to Kunal.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I just wanted to ask a question about somebody who is transitioning into an IT career from a non-IT background, who is above, say, 30 years of age, and how should they approach going into any kind of interview or writing a resume? Should they include their other professional work experience on it, or just be it like more conditioned towards the IT stuff that they've been doing recently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you have, you're not from an engineering or IT background, you have some experience outside of that and you're transitioning in, what do you include in the resume? So I would do a bit of both. So I would include some of your past experience just so that people have a picture of who you are and what you've spent time doing. Sometimes it can be really valuable. Other industries teach you lots of really valuable skills around communication and critical thinking that translate well to engineering. But I would also make sure to include some personal projects you've been working on. Even, especially if you don't have any engineering experience at a company yet, that's where it becomes really important to include your GitHub or cool personal projects you've worked on, or if you've gone through a dev bootcamp or things like that, just mentioning that and talking about the stuff you've built there. So yeah, so wouldn't ignore the other experience entirely, but also make sure you're including some showcase of your technical abilities, whether it be personal projects or GitHub links or stuff like that.
Let's go next to Irene.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for this session. It's very informative and awesome. Thanks a lot. And
glad to hear it.
The question is, what source can you recommend for the practicing this the interview type of questions?
Yeah, really good question. And so we'll send out some links afterwards so you have them. So, but I have a few off the top of my head. So there's a book that's called Cracking the Coding Interview. It's really good. It basically has a bunch of problems and they're all categorized. So there's a section on string problems. There's a section on recursion. And so if you're like, hey, I'm really bad at recursion, I just need like 50 recursion problems, this book is really good. Excuse me. Other online sources are LeetCode is really good. Similar thing there, you can see problems with sort of like different difficulty levels, and many of them have answer keys. So that's LeetCode, which we'll link. And then the last one is called Project Euler. Euler with a E, like the mathematician. But similar thing there. There's just a lot of practice problems there, and oftentimes solutions you can look at and compare your solutions to those. So I would start there, and which among those three, that's probably 1,000+ practice problems. But there's lots of other sources on the internet too that we can link to. But those three are good starting points.
Awesome, thank you.
Let's go to Ben next.
Hi, thanks, Tommy, for the talk today. My question is, for someone wanting to get into this stuff without having the bachelor's, are we immediately disqualified, one? And two, what are some areas within computer science that we can go to that aren't currently oversaturated, like that aren't, like for example, front end?
Yeah, really good question. So basically, if you don't have the undergrad degree, what do you do? So you're definitely not immediately disqualified. I think for some roles, as with regardless of bachelor, for some roles, if you're applying to a role that requires a lot of experience, don't do that. I would instead start with stuff geared to your experience. Maybe it's an internship, maybe it's an apprenticeship program, or a junior engineering role. These are all really common. And then, as you mentioned, areas like front end or sometimes like DevOps can be a little less experience heavy and sort of a good way to get your foot in the door. Like another one is it's called user interface engineering, which is like a little bit of front end, a little bit of like design too. So those areas can be good starting points. And then also people who have gone through dev boot camps, they can also build a network that way. So it's less about the skills you learn and more about the connections that boot camp might have to a variety of companies that are hiring. I don't have any particular boot camp to recommend, and they're sort of all in different geographical regions, but that can also be valuable there. Think about it less about just the skills, but more about, okay, this boot camp's connected with 100 companies looking for junior engineers. So yeah, definitely don't worry about not having the undergrad degree. There's still lots of ways to break in.
Got it, thanks.
Let's go to Parth next.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
we can hear you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the great session. It was very informative. And I would like to ask a question that for me, campus placements at my university start in like 4 months. And I just have 4 months to prepare for all these interviews, right? So I would like to, I would like for you to define me a domain of problems that I should attempt or that I should practice, so as to that are more common in interviews. So I see a lot of competitive programming websites and they have a lot of problems that are very difficult, and I don't really think that they are usually asked in interviews. So if you were to define a domain of problems, right, that we should practice, then how would you define that domain?
Yeah, let's see. So first, 4 months is a lot of time. So don't worry about the time crunch there. That's a lot of time. So A lot of the sources I just list, they'll often list difficulties next to the problems. So these competitive programming problems, they'll almost always have a difficulty of like hard or very hard or impossible or whatever the cute name the site decides to give it. So I would start with the easy and the medium ones. I think that those two difficulties are probably what you're going to run into the most, because again, we're expecting you to solve this in 30 to 45 minutes, and there's just no way that someone, unless they have a competitive programming background, can solve some competitive programming problem in 30 minutes. And most of those take several hours anyway. So even if you are a competitive programmer, it's taking you hours to do that. So yeah, so I would look around those three sources. They all have difficulties tags. I'd focus on the easy and the medium. And then for topics, I would just try to cover the topics that I listed on the slides. Or even, if you open Cracking the Coding Interview, you're going to see, 10 or 20 topics or so, and just try to sample from a variety of topics. So don't practice like 100 string problems. I'd practice 10 from 10 topics rather than 100 from one. So I can't give like a sequence of like, here's like 100 problems off the top of my head to practice, but I would think about sort of like which areas you're having the most trouble with and practicing those areas.
Let's go to Matt next.
Thank you. Once again, thanks to everyone who was willing to organize this and give us so much information. What I'm sort of curious about is the process of securing interviews and finding jobs that companies are going to notice. Where do you think is the best place to start looking for technical jobs in this area?
Yeah, great question. Sort of where to look. So there's a few sources. So there's some good job boards out there. So LinkedIn has job boards. Stack Overflow, I think, has job boards. AngelList, if you're looking for sort of like small to mid-sized companies, a big job board. And then there are also a variety of hiring platforms. So we at Serenade use some of these too, and we've hired people out of them. So things like TripleByte, Underdog, A-List, Hired.com. These are basically platforms where you sign up and the platform will give you an interview just to make sure that you qualify. And then your name appears to all these other companies who are hiring. What's great is it's free for you. It's actually the company who hires you who pays the platform, which is unfortunate for me, but great for you. And so that's a good way to just get yourself in front of a bunch of companies, but also just view that large directory. So I'll post links to these as well so you have them. But these job boards are a great start.
Thank you so much.
And let's go next to Aman. Aman, I don't think we can hear you if you're speaking. All right, Aman, maybe we'll come back to you. If you want to type your question into the chat, or if you manage to get your audio working, we might be able to try again. But let's go next to Ginny.
Yeah, hi, it's Ginny. Well, I have a question regarding something year of experience, I would say. It's like when I was a fresher, I just got to know now, I'm not a fresher anymore now. I got to know that the project you have worked on is very, very important. That plays a very important role for what you have learned in there, that matters. But as a fresher, if I landed in some kind of project where I wasn't given any important role or any particular thing to work on, that IT actually, I didn't get the feel that what IT is actually like. And when I switched my job, the year of experience, I lacked that. It wasn't expected out of me that I don't know a lot of things. It was something like that. So how do I tackle with those kind of things where I'm lagging a lot of knowledge that how IT and how project work when I didn't actually worked on it? I can give interviews, I can appear for different job roles from whatever I have learned personally, but but actually not what IT demands of. What do I do in that case?
Got it. Yeah. So I think that basically, broadly speaking, so if you have even some intern, you could do an internship and it's like, oh, that ended up being like not super impactful. I didn't learn that much that internship, and I sort of like burned that year or 3 months. What do I do now? And that's a good question. I think this is where personal projects can make up for that. So even if some past internship or role was you didn't learn too much, you can still showcase some personal projects and build something really cool and really impactful to showcase that, okay, even though this role I don't have much to speak about there, I do have these other projects that I can talk about. And then, and then as you're looking around for your next role and project, makes you sort of know it. You sort of know now, okay, well, this wasn't so impactful. Let me make sure I don't make that mistake again, or as much as I can, try to be in a position that's a little different than that one. And just, I try to take a really forward-looking look towards this. I think it's totally okay to have experiences that just weren't super impactful. You didn't learn a lot. That's sort of inevitable. It happens to everyone, and it's totally okay. You just sort of look forward and say, okay, what can I do next? What can I build to sort of showcase that I do have these skills, or go off and learn any skills that you don't have, and then build something to show that you have them. So don't worry too much. I think it happens to everybody. There's plenty of people who have had project or internships that just like, they weren't that great, and that's fine. Don't worry about it. Look forward and think about that.
Tommy, do you have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, I got time.
Okay.
All right, let's go next to Praise.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I first want to say thank you so much, Tommy. Was so enlightening. I have one question, but kind of speaking to. My first question is: do you have to get to your final years of being around finishing the bachelor's before you get to apply for internship jobs in the company? That's my first question. And the other split to it is, if so, I'm currently in my first year. Are there opportunities to apprenticeship in companies, or I have to like stick around and learn to wait till my final year and I get internship? That's just all my questions.
Got it. So I think I caught the first question. I'm not sure I caught the second, but I can answer the first one, which was, it sounded like, do you have to wait until after you finish your bachelor's or your undergrad before starting to apply to stuff? So the answer is probably not. There's lots of internships that are specifically geared at, I have 0 to 1 years of experience, or 0 to 1 internships, or I'm a freshman, or I'm a junior. So there are definitely different opportunities. Just sort of look out for them. Most job postings will have some years of experience or requirements, or even just give a picture of, hey, if you don't have a lot of experience, this is the role for you to help learn. I'm not sure I caught the second half. I don't know if David or Brian caught it.
Praise, your microphone was breaking up. Do you mind typing your second question into the chat, and we'll come back to it in just a moment? We'll keep an eye out in the chat. If you message me directly, message David. Brian, back to you.
Yeah, sure. Let's go next to Jacob.
Maybe?
Yes.
The question is, how do you get a job on a
I think we're having trouble hearing you too, Jacob. It's a little crackly. Brian, shall we call on someone else? And Jacob, do you want to Oh, there we go. Tommy, on behalf of Jacob, can I get any technical jobs at a young age? He is 16.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was at Quora previously, and we've hired people out of high school as well. It's certainly harder, just because typically people are looking for someone with a little more experience, but it's totally possible. I think one thing that you might be able to do is join even some university like research groups or some more research oriented roles will have sort of like apprenticeship or junior positions where someone in high school can jump in. But yeah, certainly possible. It's a little harder. I would sugarcoat that. It's harder, but these roles certainly do exist. You just have to spend a little more time looking for them. But yeah, it's honestly great to be able to get experience at such a young age and learn that early.
And Praise, if you're still there, do chat me your question and I can recite it verbally as well. Brian?
Yeah, in the meantime, let's go to Kunal.
I wanted to ask one question again. You talked about how to write your resume in the first part. So I just wanted to ask again, what kind of projects for somebody who is again trying to break into IT would be more interestingly good to be included on the resume side of the things?
Yeah, I think as a recruiter or a hiring manager, I'm less concerned about what you've built and more concerned about, did you build something, or what's the scale of what you built? So like I say, I would sort of lean towards hobbies, or maybe there's some problem you have every day. Like maybe there's no good to-do list app that has some feature you want, and so you can go build a little web app, or I don't know, just sort of like think about problems you have or just things you're interested in and build something. If it's more important for me to see like, oh, cool, they've built these like 3 personal projects, maybe I'll click through to one, try it out. I'm not looking for, okay, they must have a project that has a database with at least 5 tables, or they must be using React or something like that. I'm just more looking for, did they build something cool, and did they put some time into it and build something that they can really be proud of and that I can use. That's more important than any sort of like technical requirement.
Thank you.
I think we have about 10 minutes left. Tommy Praised wrote us to ask his second question was, are there opportunities for apprenticeship? And if there are, can you propose resources?
Yeah, certainly opportunities for apprentice programs. Some companies have them and some companies don't. I think all those same job boards that I'd mentioned earlier, they'll sort of have postings there. And so look out for keywords like junior or apprentice or practicum or university. Just sort of like look out for those keywords, and then the job descriptions will say, what experience level they're looking for.
Back to Brian.
Sure, let's go next to Fahad.
Hey, thanks for organizing this. My question was, I think I already posted this on the submission thing, but I don't think we got to it. But so I joined my company as an engineer, but I quickly fell into a development manager role. And ever since then, I've been going a little backwards in the sense that I've been learning my way around how software works, how to manage developers, making agile lists and scope documents and everything. And in reality, I wanted to shift towards being more of a developer before, I apply to another job where I tell myself, hey, I've been a development manager. So I just wanted to know at what point do I consider myself good enough or, experienced enough to apply for a developer position?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tough to give a sort of like a general, once you meet this number of years, you're good. Let's see. So I'd think about, maybe there, I don't know your company obviously, but there could be opportunities for you to be able to write code. Even though you're a full-time development manager, maybe there's sort of opportunities for you to contribute on projects. Maybe not something like mission critical, but adding, fixing some bugs or adding some smaller new features to, sort of like flex those development muscles. But honestly, the best advice would be you can sort of self-assess. If you're doing these interview problems and you're finding yourself, okay, I'm not getting any of these right, then just practice some more and keep learning. Maybe take another CS course or sort of continue learning there. Or if you're finding, hey, I'm doing all these problems and then these are pretty workable. I'm doing okay here. Then maybe you can make that jump. It's going to vary a lot by different companies and industries and even geography. But the best thing is take a shot. Feel free to interview somewhere, and then if you bomb, oh well, that's okay. You've learned from that. Or if you do well, then maybe you're good to go.
Thanks.
All right, let's go next to Carolina.
Hi there. I have a question about the culture in the tech industry. If you're, sort of a socially anxious person, how can you, is there a book that you recommend or some sort of resource to understand what the culture is like and what people expect people to behave, how they should behave?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me think. I'm sure there are. Nothing pops into my head right now. I can think of a bunch of like management books that sort of describe like how to be a good manager. And interestingly, often reading a management book can also teach you how to be a good non-manager, because it's sort of like about what managers are looking for. But let me think about it and maybe get back to you on books and resources. But a lot of times in the interview process itself is where you can start to get a flavor for the culture. You'll probably find even doing like 2 or 3 interviews, you might have totally different experiences just in terms of, who the people are, what their working style is, what the, you can get a sense for what the company culture is from doing those interviews. So that's the best way to do it, is just to go in and talk to folks. But I would just sort of keep in mind that, try to go for it. I think that, this process can be super intimidating, and so it's really hard. But this practice and going through this process can help make things less intimidating. But for resources, let me get back to you on that so I can give you a better answer.
Okay, thank you.
We can include something in our follow-up email. I think, Brian, time for a few final questions?
Sure, let's take a question from Jose.
Hello, it's out of curiosity. Could you tell us about an interesting project you've seen while being an interviewer?
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to think of something recent that I've seen. Oh yeah, so somebody made they made this really cool little 2D game. It was like this multiplayer platformer game. And it didn't seem terribly technically complex, but it was really cool because I think they're coming out of a boot camp and they came from this art background, and so they had done all of the sprites and the game stuff themselves, and then they sort of built this cool game. So I thought that was a cool example of somebody who had taken their prior experience and sort of leveraged that to build something cool. So yeah, I think about that. That was a cool one. There's other ones. I often see these things, nothing comes off the head, but just sort of I had some problem and I went and solved it. Me and my wife always have different shopping lists and we couldn't merge our shopping lists. So I built this little app that just creates a shared shopping list between the two of us so I never forget something. And little stuff like that is cool because it shows they built something for themselves to use in their daily life, and it sort of solved some maybe not super interesting problem, but interesting to them because they cared enough to solve it.
Tommy, if I could verbalize a question that was sent directly to me, since we of course have a lot of students who have been taking courses on Coursera and edX and the like. How do MOOC online certificates from edX, Coursera, et cetera, have an influence on interviewers and one's resume, would you say?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's gonna vary. I think that they're obviously not a negative. In no world is doing these courses a negative. There are some positions that just require some number of industry years of experience, and so I don't think you could substitute a MOOC for 3 years working at a real company. But especially as if you're sort of looking for a first role and breaking in, they're super helpful just to show. The main thing they show is that you really cared enough to go off and learn this on your own. You sort of it's a lot of work to learn programming and sort of being able to showcase, here's the work that I've put in because I really want to do this. I really want to be able to contribute as an engineer. So that to me is really great to see. And it's also neat to see sort of these more specialized courses, like maybe somebody wants to do a machine learning role and they can take some machine learning course on edX or Coursera. And so that's really helpful because it knows to me it shows me that, okay, I can talk about some basic machine learning stuff in this interview and they'll be able to contribute there. So yeah, I think every company is going to be different and they can't substitute for real world experience, but what they can do is really show the interviewer you care a lot. Here's the skills that we can be confident and help get you through the door.
Great, thanks. Brian, perhaps one or two more questions?
All right, let's take a question from Ramon.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, so my question is, sometimes I have given a lot of interviews. So sometimes more theoretical questions are being asked. So that is a little so many theories, it's little difficult to remember. We can solve problems. We can solve problems after solving so many problems. So can you give us how to respond in that particular case?
With a problem you've never seen before, or what's an example?
So not exactly problem solving. It would be like a theoretical question, like for a particular technology. So what goes inside that and all those things.
Got it. So there's some more sort of the trivia questions, like how does React work or something. Yeah. That's a good one. Those are those are definitely harder because it's hard to anticipate. Exactly. The best advice I'd have there is as much as you can, look at the technologies the company is using and look at, on the job posting, they might say, we're looking for folks with React or Postgres or Python or something experience. So they just sort of take those and spend some time reviewing those. So for instance, if the job doesn't mention anything about Java, don't worry about Java for that interview. It's just try to gear your preparation towards that actual job posting. But otherwise, even just searching around the internet, you can find sort of common trivia questions that somebody might ask about. I remember iOS was a very popular topic for trivia questions. People would ask how does memory management work, or what's the difference between a category and a protocol. And So yeah, even just searching online, you'll probably find some of these. I'm personally not a fan of these trivia questions because I would rather test wisdom rather than knowledge. But yeah, some companies do them, and that's probably the best way to prepare is to sort of make sure you know the requirements of the role.
Yeah. Thank you.
And let's take a question from Stella.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I actually have like a few questions, but they're not much. And thank you for organizing this. So I'm a new coder. I just started coding like 2 months ago. So how long do I need to be coding for before I can apply for anything you get? So how long, and do I need to learn multiple languages before I'll say I want to apply for an internship or something? Then I'm a law student. Do I need to like put that in my resume for applying for any position? And as a student living in Nigeria, how would this be? Are there remote positions?
Stella,
So
I think
I got the first few. I can definitely answer those first few, and then if you want to type to David those other questions. So to start, so let's see. So first question was, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. I had them all, I had them all ready to go. First question was
how long should you be studying for? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it's gonna depend a bit. I think you know, even just taking CS50 and maybe maybe one more course after that is enough. So you could probably do that in 3 to 6 months before you're ready to take on some sort of apprentice role. Then you had a question about sort of if you're doing more than just CS, what to put on your resume. And there too, I put a mix. I'd put, I'm a student in this particular area, or I have some experience in this particular area, but make sure you don't have, no CS on there. Include those personal projects, include the courses that you're taking. There was one more that I don't remember.
Languages.
Oh, languages, right. And do you have to know multiple languages? No, definitely not. I would actually advise just picking one to interview in. But even aside from the interview, I don't think most companies will require you to know at least 3 languages or something like that. The job role will tell you, like, you must know Python, you must know JavaScript. But for the most part, most roles are, are able to code in some language you're familiar with and able to learn that new language once you're on the job.
And Tommy, a recurring question I've been messaged relates to people being in lockdown now and also being afar in different countries where there might not be as many local tech opportunities. Do you have any advice for finding remote opportunities in tech?
Yeah, I think the remote tech opportunities are definitely taking off. They're way more common than they used to be, which is great. I think it's something that's good for the industry and good for people generally. So those same job boards I mentioned, a lot of these tech companies are going to advertise remote. A lot of these job boards also like incentivize you to advertise remote, so there'll be like a big like remote banner on one of these roles. So it would definitely check out those same job boards. There are also a few particular job boards that are like just for remote roles that I can try to find those, and we can include them in the email as well. But in general, I think it's great. The one thing to keep in mind with remote is some companies have restrictions on time zones. Well, they'll basically say like, hey, we're headquartered in San Francisco. You can be plus or minus 3 hours from San Francisco. Quora, where I was, it has the remote policy, which is possibly the most interesting one I've seen, which is you can live in any time zone as long as you commit to being available between, I forget the now, like 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Pacific time. So, you could live in Denmark and maybe that's like 2 a.m. for you, but hey, if you want to do that, like, that's fine. Like that can be the life you want. So that's the only thing I'd keep in mind is those like time zone restrictions with remote stuff. But yeah, it's really popular now. It's a lot easier to find remote roles today than it was 6 months ago.
Well, I want to be mindful of the team's time here, so I hope folks will indeed forgive if we can't quite field all questions. But thank you again to Tommy. And Tommy, shall we give you the final word of advice here?
Oh man, I think the biggest thing is interviewing is hard. It's really stressful. It's not fun. Everyone's going to bomb an interview. If you bomb an interview, that's okay. It's really intimidating. Don't get discouraged. Just take this as an opportunity to learn and move on to the next one. And you're eventually going to get better at it. This is like, it's a skill. It's a muscle you can build. The more you practice, the more you do it, the more you're going to get better at it. So I guess my parting words would be, don't give up, keep practicing, and you'll eventually get there.
And Tommy, we have a tradition of taking a group photo of sorts at the very end. If folks would like to participate by smiling or waving or generally looking their best, if Andrew, you wouldn't mind scrolling and taking a few screenshots. I'm going to stop waving just so I can help take screenshots, but keep waving. This will be Tommy's parting postcard via which we all remember our time with Tommy. Andrew, if you wouldn't mind continuing to page through the screens. Feel free to keep waving like this. If you'd like to put a thumbs up in the icon under reactions in Zoom, you can do that. I think there's an applause icon for Tommy if you would like to do that. I think we need just a few more seconds of this. Andrew, just let me know when we have the photo. Keep waving. Here we go. So a lot of screenfuls. We still have over 400 people here with us on Zoom. Those of you watching on YouTube, don't worry about this. Andrew, was that you?
I think Andrew said we're all set.
Yeah, we're all set. All right. Well, all right. Thank you again to Tommy, and we'll see you all soon. We'll be in touch via email with links.
Thanks, everyone.